saw this poster. It was quite a long while ago, actually, and it had a phrase on it which I really hated. And I can't remember what it was for, so it's obviously a terrible poster. But it had the phrase on it, "Technology will save us." And I was like, my God. From what and how? Like...
This is Queer Coded, a We Code podcast supported by Northcoders. My name's Emily Bennett.
And my name is Eli Wiggins.
Hi, I'm Sam Caine.
Hello, Sam. Would you like to tell us your role at Northcoders?
Yeah, I'm the Director of Technology at Northcoders. I've been here since time immemorial. I was one of the first members of staff to join.
In terms of your identity, what impact do you feel having been LGBTQIA has had on your career path, if any?
So this is a really interesting question, but I did think about it a lot because I do think it's affected me in a lot of ways. So I should probably say, for the record, I am a gay man, and I think that like growing up as a gay man, like in a society, like I was born in the late 80s, so in a society it was kind of like in the shadow of that giant headstone in that horrible AIDS advert that came out in like the 1980s, like where it was such a taboo and so many people had effectively died just basically social negligence. And as a child, I think growing up in that world, you realise like I realised pretty young that I was gay. I knew and I wished that I wasn't. It's just like, no, surely I'm going to grow out of this. Like there's that kind of like, this is just a phase. I'll get through it. And I really, really didn't want to be. I really didn't want to be. And that's nothing again. My family have been great and they've always been super supportive. And they always, always, always made it abundantly clear that if I ever was, because I obviously was, that it would be fine. So it was nothing to do with it. And I'm lucky in that respect. Lots of people don't have that. But there's a lot of there's so much social context growing up in this world, and like everything from like the word gay just being like a slur in the playground, and every Disney villain basically being gay. It's like you grow up believing that you're an aberration, there's something wrong with you, and after a while that made me very angry and very jaded, and I think it made me look at the world in a very different way. I am quite a disruptive individual, and I think that when tech became exciting, like in the noughties, that kind of disruptive nature was something that called to me. Like it's an industry in which you can change something. I think particularly within Northcoders, where you're like reaching out to segments of society that have never had this as an opportunity before, and you can change the face of technology by like educating new groups of people and empowering people who would never have had this opportunity given to them in any other way. I think that is disruptive. I think I want to disrupt an education that didn't work for me. I want to disrupt the ways that people find work and get well paid and emancipate themselves from crushingly boring jobs, not because of any failing of their own, but because society's failed them. And this society failed me, and I spent a lot of time very sad about that, and I don't want anyone else to feel like that.
That's a really good answer.
That was an amazing answer.
I think
Nearly cried
in terms of the sort of the language that you use to talk about yourself and sort of speaking about disruption, I think that's really interesting because the whole thing of the term queer now is sort of, it is a disruption of the norm. So I think that's a really fantastic way of describing it, and I'm very in keeping with the title of the podcast. Yeah. I appreciate that.
I'm keeping it on.
No, that's very interesting though. I think, as someone else who was born in the 80s, I really sort of identify with that kind of feeling like you know that you're different and you don't want to be, and that you shouldn't talk about the way that you feel about these things because even as a child that there's going to be some kind of bad repercussions of just being who you are.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
Is there any changes you can think of that you would love to work towards? Not even just see, but like specifically work towards?
I don't know is the answer to that question, because it's very, very difficult to like imagine myself growing up today as a gay man. I think it's changed a lot for gay people, in that there's a lot more representation, there's a lot more kind of like social acceptance. I think like the battle for equal rights has definitely not been won, and like trans people in particular are getting a lot of heat in the mainstream press at the moment, and it's pretty disgusting, and it feels like a relitigation of a lot of those arguments that were had in the 80s about gay people.
Yeah.
And I want that to change. I want that to stop. I want how people define themselves and live their lives not to be a discussion point for well-paid journalists in London.
Yeah.
Like, what businesses of theirs, like that their rhetoric should have such deleterious effects on people's lives just because they want to live like authentically. I want that to change. I think progress has been made in some areas, but it's not a linear thing. I think it can be lost, and I think maybe there's a little complacency amongst some people in the community about it just being a linear thing, and I think there needs to be a lot more solidarity in queer areas, and I'd like that to change, I guess, and I would like the media discussion to change, I think, but I have no power to do that.
Well, I mean, you say we have no power, but you're also talking about like the fact that technology and kind of like the queer acceptance into technology is such a disruption anyway, that I feel like it kind of does have its own power. Maybe not on the scale that we want as of yet, but I definitely see it as kind of like an unstoppable force at this point. It just kind of hasn't hit that immovable object yet.
I think that it's not like an unalloyed good though, and I think that there probably needs to be vigilance within tech about that too. Like technology has empowered lots of people, and we should and there's definitely great aspects to it, and people building communities and finding solidarity where they would not be able to before, and finding like avenues of kind of acceptance that might not be available to them in their family home and stuff like that. But it also allows cesspits of misinformation to collect, and I think that there are like dangers to tech too that people that work in the industry, we should be vigilant about also. It's a concern of mine that like I saw this poster. It was quite a long while ago actually, and it had a phrase on it which I really hated, and I can't remember what it was for, so it's obviously a terrible poster, but it had the phrase on it, "Technology will save us," and I was like, my God, from what and how? I try not to have too much faith in it. I have tried to have faith in people, and technology can empower us to do good, but it can also empower people to do evil. And we need to make sure that we're pulling in the right direction, and that the just choices that we make are thoughtful and conscientious. And I think that like you often see it in social media, that they become hotbeds of hatred. Like I can think of a few off the top of my head which are pretty bad. Like not naming names, don't want to get that edited. But yeah. But I agree with an asterisk.
A big bus on the end.
Yeah.
I think it's, I don't know how what other people might feel about this, but I feel like we do have like a really nice culture about this kind of thing at Northcoders, but I think we can't say that without having like the conversation of what it's like not at Northcoders, still in tech.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I when we do like our surveys to kind of say like, you know, what are these like what experiences you have in that kind of thing, and one of them was talking about like an ex-student who had gone into an interview, and she was female, and the interviewer literally said to her, it's impossible to find good women coders, like to her face.
Jesus.
And it's kind of like, if that's the culture you're bringing on an interview, like it must just be such a kind of look behind the curtain thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know especially like when we do hiring partner presentations and there is only like white men just kind of sat there in front of me telling me like, you should come and work for us, and they're not giving me a reason. I think that was one of the biggest reasons I came to Northcoders. It was very clearly the kind of culture that a lot of people wanted to be in, and I think that's missing from 99% of tech companies right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's often a question that gets asked in hiring partner presentations, like, how are you going to address this? And actually sometimes you get really good answers, but it's very difficult to address it in an organisation that just seems so stolid.
I think it's a really interesting point there, because I think when we have these conversations around diversity and representation, you always get people saying, well, we just want to make sure we've got the best people for the job.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that is such a it's not meant in a bad way, but I think it shows sort of a lack of self-awareness in that if everyone in the room who's hiring that person looks the same,
mm-hmm.
and is the same age and has the same, life experiences, who are they thinking is the best person for the job? It's probably not going to be the same as, you've got to be in that room to change that makeup and what you decide is the best person for the job. I said that quite ineloquently.
But I completely agree with you, and I think that like it's a natural human thing to hire people that remind you of people that you were good at the job.
Absolutely.
And if all the people that were good at the job in your company so far have been white middle class men, then that's probably who you're going to hire. You've got a huge bias towards that type of person, and you might look for reasons in an interview to justify that bias. And it's such a subconscious thing that you do have to be kind of vigilant with yourself about it, I think. But you can intellectualize it in an interview. But an interview is a deeply personal thing. Like the way that you interact with another person is extremely subjective. And there's no way of justifying it with a scorecard or anything like that. Like you need to, I think at some point you're going to have to make decisions that don't feel natural to you, that feel disruptive to you, if you truly want to reorganise the structure of your organisation and make it look different and behave differently.
I think it shows like a lack of foresight in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're trying to say like we're only going to hire the people that are best for the job, there's people who are best for the job are likely people who have had the best chances in life, who've kind of had a chance to get to this point. That doesn't necessarily mean in 5 years, if you gave them the same position, they would be at different levels. And it's kind of that thing of like, if your company is only hiring people for what they are now and not for what they could be when you train them, that sounds like a lack on your part more than anything. Like you clearly don't have a system set up to propel people into a good position. And so kind of like just choosing this homogenous workforce, you're kind of like shooting yourself in the leg a bit, saying like, we only want person who've had these experiences, who've had these level of chances, who probably have very similar kind of styles of problem solving. And to kind of like go out of that, to disrupt that, you could add like a whole new tool to your belt. I just think that's where like this, they're just not even thinking about this kind of thing. And it's so much framed as like, oh, well, women are taking all the jobs now because they're women. It's like, still not happening, but okay. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us today, Sam. It's been really nice to hear your thoughts and some really well articulated points.
Thank you both very much. It's my pleasure, absolutely.